This is the Daily Saints Pod with Zach and Greg. This is indeed the Daily Saints Pod with Zach and Greg. I am your host, Zach. Unfortunately, Greg is not here today. He's seeing, I want to say, Britain's Strongest Man. He managed to bag tickets to that. So unfortunately, he has missed a absolutely brilliant goal in the Northern End for the first time in a while. And yeah, sure he's going to be devastated to have missed out. But it's fine. I'm here to cover the game today and have a look at, another nice little win. And whilst it doesn't paper over all of the wider questions we have about the club and the wider questions about transfer policy and sort of the shock of Adam Armstrong disappearing out of the door, it soothes the wound a little bit that the man who replaces him has scored on his debut. But in the build-up to this game, they were trying to talk about it being a fixture that has history. It was very bizarre, I think, from sort of everybody's perspective. Both sets of fans feeling like this is a bit weird. Again, I think I'm still mad, maybe, about Watford scoring with a handball like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't even know at this point. But yeah, it wasn't quite the historical fixture that they tried to claim it was. However, it was a win, and it's another 3 points on the board, where there's quite a lot of games this season we haven't managed that. So let's bring it back to the start and talk about team lineups. So in goal, Perez, which is completely unsurprising. Obviously, we don't have to have that debate anymore as to who starts, which makes life a lot easier. No real surprises at the centre-back pairing being Stevens, Taylor, Harper-Bellis. They're playing really well at the moment. And why would you change something if it's not broken? Wellington developing into the left-back we always wanted to see from him. And, he once again started today and had a really solid game. Bree at right-back, who, just seems like one of the first names on the team sheet every game since he's come back, right? He's had a lot of championship experience this season. It begs the question as to why we even really sent him out on loan, because it seems like he's almost like a missing piece. It's genuinely, for me, felt like a bit of transfer business in the window that's helped us out massively. And in actuality, it's just returning, I guess, a player to his rightful place. Bree was back in the side. Middle of the park, we had Downs and Yander. Me and Greg have said quite a few times we wouldn't really be surprised or bothered for any combination of the midfield players we currently have. We still have our questions as to what the entire point of transferring Romeo was, if not just for like dressing room presence and I guess something for the fans. But, we're quite happy with Yander, Charles and Downs. And luckily, all three of them were fit, or otherwise we probably potentially could have had problems. And then, strike force of Cienza, Azaz, Fellows and Stewart. Really sort of if it's not broke, don't fix it, which was good, even if they kind of had a bit of a struggle game today. So let's talk about the game itself and get directly into it. That game, I think, was hard. It wasn't the prettiest thing to watch. I don't think that the game itself goes down in the sort of history books as much as they tried to force the fixture to. It was very sort of the physical side of it, and the physicality of Watford was very much on show, and we seemed really tired and sluggish despite having like a full week of rest. When we've got midweek games, I can kind of expect it. But it just wasn't the sort of same level of sort of pace that you'd expect from sort of Fellows and Cienza in a game like today. But part of that is me wondering, is it just sort of the physicality of Watford tightening up a little bit more? They had a really good game midweek against Hull, where although they didn't score, it was 0-0 in the end. So it was, they managed to keep them out, which they did quite successfully for most of the game against us. Not that we had a significantly large amount of chances. Very, very early on, though, they did almost capitalise on a mistake from Perez, which luckily, we managed to sort out. But when I say that Perez gives me Boric vibes, I hope people can start to kind of understand why, just a little bit. Luckily, it wasn't punished, and he now gets another clean sheet, which is always good for the confidence of both the defence and the goalkeeper himself. Obviously, we had like a shot quite early on. About 20 minutes in, we had a decent chance from Stewart that just wasn't capitalised on, unfortunately, and it was brought a good save from the Watford camp. And then there was the Flynn Downs incident where he went in for a crunching tackle, but came out worse for wear. And he kind of struggled and carried on for a little bit longer. But you could sort of tell, even after the initial challenge, there was a lot more discomfort than he let on. And yeah, unfortunately, had to be substituted for Shea. And I think that Shea's lack of match minutes were on display because it kind of the tempo of the game had already at that point just started to slow down a little bit more. And although, in my opinion, the first half we still kind of looked the better team, we looked like we'd had like the better chances, but there was still nothing really of note, and it sent me into the second half with a little bit more worry than I had by the end of the game. Right, as I said, I didn't really feel like they were threatening us for a lot of the game, but I think the apprehension of how we have been in second halves was definitely there. And I'm glad we were kind of able to start putting that to bed as a myth more than anything else. So second half kicks off and we start to struggle a little bit. And they had a bit of a spell of dominance, if I'm totally honest. And, you've got some fouls taking place that really, like Taylor Harbour-Bellis got booked for a professional foul and sort of slowing, trying. Taylor Harbour-Bellis got booked for a foul. And the game was really being brought to us by Watford, which again is a problem we've seen to have with second halves. And again, I don't know if it's just sort of the legs on some of the players were starting to go a little bit, but we very much got bullied into our own half for the early second half of the game. But we managed to withstand the pressure, which I think is the big difference, right? We had quite a lot of corners go against us, and whilst we still didn't clear them in the most spectacular of ways, we were able to deal with that and not concede, which I think that was a massive point for us. And then obviously came one of the bigger moments of the game, which was the substitutions. Now, I didn't talk about it when I talked about the team sheet, but some of the big news that came out obviously was Laren was on the bench, which we'd predicted in our preview episode that he probably would, especially where he's been playing previously. And, I don't think he's quite as much fit as we'd want him to be because he was very much limited to substitution appearances on his last loan spell. And Edozie, as Adam Blackmore put it, has come back from the brink, right? There was lots of talk about whether he'd go in January. I think there was quite a lot of expectation that he would go in January. That obviously wasn't the case. And then they said that he might be reintegrated back into the squad. And it kind of felt like with Jay out with an injury or, an issue or whatever, you'd expect to see Edozie back in that starting lineup unless there was something else going on. And clearly not. He was in that team sheet. So he came on for Cienza, which kind of made sense. Cienza, I think, had a difficult game today. I don't know if it was just sort of long-term fatigue or still carrying a knock from the other week, which hasn't quite sorted itself out yet. But, he didn't have the greatest day with his sort of free kicks and didn't have the greatest sort of pace. He did have a couple goes, and I think at one point he pounced on a backwards header, which unfortunately was unable to finish off. So he still did Cienza things, but you could tell he was just a little bit off. And Edozie coming on for him, I think Edozie makes sense as a slightly better substitute than Jay Robinson, and that's no disrespect to Jay Robinson. Me and Greg have made our opinions on that abundantly clear throughout the season. I just think that he's better suited to a different position to where he's constantly played. Whereas Edozie kind of looked like he'd stepped back into the role that he'd played previously pretty well, considering he's not really had any game time for a while. I didn't really expect him to come on and be as good as he was. And, straight away, you also had, Cyle Larin come on for Ross Stewart. as I said, we alluded to the fact that we thought he would probably get in, and it makes that it's a straight swap. It does raise questions as to what is going to happen with Archer. I think that obviously they potentially cancelled his Rangers move due to the fact that they were still going to need him. I think from his perspective, there's an expectation of playing slightly more rather than just sort of being a bench warmer. But as you know, Greg quite often likes to point out, we have different profiles of striker, and the profile we still needed at that point was what had already been on the pitch, right? It wasn't like, well, we need to whip out somebody that can hold up the ball for someone that's a bit nippy. And so it makes sense that, you know, he was swapped in. But you do wonder, and I feel for him a little bit, because obviously there's a lot of upheaval around all the sort of transfer deadline day, and we don't realistically know how close that move was. It could have, we don't know if all the I's had been dotted, and we don't even know if, you know, we haven't really had confirmation around that at all. But when he does get an opportunity next up, I hope that he grabs it with both hands, and I hope, if anything, we just end up having like solid competition between all our strikers. And on top of that, for the solid competition to exist, though, got to hope that Ross Stewart stays fit. So it made sense that they took him off as well, because he had a good game. He made some defensive interceptions that I noticed that, you know, his tallness and physicality were vital to. And I'd also say that that's one of the things that I instantly noticed with Laren, is that we kind of used to having these tall, physical, but like quite gangly strikers in Ross Stewart and Paul Onuachu. And Laren just seemed a bit more physically built to be able to like withstand, you know, and as he's even pointed out in his post-match sort of interview about his goal, is that he was able to sort of bully the defender off him a little bit. And yeah, so that's a really good strength, and something we've talked about needing for quite a long time. But obviously he came on with Edozie, and very, very shortly after, the goal that I alluded to took place. The corner was conceded by Stephen Mafuni, and I'm pretty sure it was won by Edozie. I think that, you know, there was a little battle going on there. So instantly you've got Edozie coming on, making an instant impact. You've then got James Bree taking over set piece delivery by from Cienza, and again, only come back to the club the last couple of weeks, and then manages to cross in really, really good ball that Laren gets on the end of, and scores probably like one of the best diving headers I've seen in a long time. Like, everyone's seen the photo by this point, and if you haven't, just check it out. If you haven't seen the goal, check it out. It's just such a good moment for us and him. And there's been a lot of sort of criticism around him coming into the club, and even me and Greg, to be fair, like, we did a profile on him. It would have come out this week, so if you haven't seen that, go back, have a look. He's an extremely experienced player. But even me and Greg on deadline day, in our conversations back and forth before we recorded that slightly manic episode where I put a pot on my head at like 11:30 p.m. or whatever it was, we discussed that we kind of felt it was a bit panic buying. It was a bit of a strange one, and we know that they've looked into other striker options, right? They've admitted that they looked into Pro at one point. I think they were also in contact with Tottenham over Manor Solomon, who ended up making a move to Fiorentina. So clearly either they knew that Adam potentially was on his way out quite early on, which means they did do more planning than we thought they did. Alternatively, they were just putting the feelers out anyway. And obviously they've ended up with Laren, and we wondered, you know, how much scouting they've actually managed to do, and how much of a sort of gamble it is. But in that episode, in which we talk about like the profile of player that he is, I kind of tried to make the point that it's as much of a gamble for him as it is for us, because he clearly wants to get back into his national team, and, you know, having a debut, coming on in sort of the last sort of 25 minutes of the game, and scoring with what you're like, you're almost your first or second touch of the ball is good. It's a good debut, right? He managed to get into the positions quite quickly, positions we've wanted those, you know, our striker to get into. He very nearly got onto the end of the ball. It was very, very similar to the cross that he did about 30 seconds prior to the corner. So yeah, I just think that, you know, I understand why quite a lot of people have been quick to judge. I'm quite happy to, you know, eat my sort of worries, but obviously there's still quite a long rest of the season. But the lone move alone, in my opinion, is worth it for the 3 points that we got today. So yeah, enough about Laren and Edozie when they came on. It was all right after that. Like, it kind of, we played well the rest of the game. We tried to go forward a little bit. It kind of sucked the wind out of Watford's sails a little bit, but then obviously they did the standard sort of, it's a bit desperation. We then were quite smart about it. Like, after we realised, we're quite in control, we got to the 90th minute. I expected far more added time than what was actually allotted in the end. For like 4 minutes, I thought was quite low considering the amount of sort of fouls and stoppages and this, that, and the other. And obviously bringing on Wood for Fellows, that was definitely like a tactical, like, let's move to a bit more defensively. And then we sort of saw out that 4 minutes without much issue. I think Shea picked up a card for a bad tackle that, he kind of had to make at the time. But, even running the ball into the sort of their corner flag right up until the 94th minute was, very much sort of, it was good to watch us see out a game and not have complete blind panic at the end. We felt very much in control towards the end. But yeah, it wasn't the best game. It's not going to go down in the history books as one we all look back at as, that was a cracker. But ultimately we broke down a side that were very physical, very disciplined, clearly trying to sort of regain composure after the loss of another manager. And whilst they're managerless, I think that their current interim manager is very much in line for the job. And I think that we struggled, but we got it over the line, and we got it over the line with the help of our new sign-in. So yeah, fantastic. And I've got a couple little things to sort of talk about at the end of after the match had ended that surprised me a little bit. So we had actually less shots than them. However, our shots were the ones that counted. We had 4 on target in comparison to their 2 out of 11. So that in itself means at least we're still being consistent with putting them into the right places. One of the other things that I thought was an interesting stat is we successfully defended 9 corners. So it was a bit of a struggle for a lot of that game. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, that was pretty decent that we were able to kind of start to move away from the curse of set pieces, right? And let's not beat around the bush. The fact that Watford are goalless in 5 hours, I want to say, is probably a contributing factor. And they're low on confidence and they weren't able to, but they tested Peretz a couple of times, and they definitely gave it a go throughout the game in spells. But the other thing that was actually really interesting to me was this. I think the first time in a long time that we've had a win where we actually had less possession. So they came at us for a lot more of the game than we did. Like, it was very sort of close. It was like 53-47. But I just thought it was interesting because for a long time it's not really felt like we kind of dominated the possession. I don't know if that's necessarily the move to the back 4, but it just means that we can be a little bit more clinical. We also had over double the amount of forward passes than backward passes. So clearly they're having that discussion. There were a couple of times that it took place, and you could hear some of the murmurs from the crowd of sort of get it forward and this and the other. But overall, yeah, as I said, not one for the history books, but a really solid game. And sort of Laren was interviewed after the post-match, and he said, honestly, it was a great feeling was with the win. And because of his experience across the board, he's been able to kind of like adapt quite quickly and gel with the team. And he puts a lot of that down to the coaching staff and behind the scenes. And I know that we're all very concerned at what is going on at the club at the moment, especially high top level, right? With Sports Republic. And, we addressed it this week as to what was going on with the, I don't even really want to call them sister clubs anymore because it's kind of disrespectful to all of us involved. Like, it feels a bit weird with everything that's going on, but there's a lot of sort of weird vibes around that. But for a player to come in and, within that first week, sort of give a lot of praise to the back end staff and sort of how he's just been able to get on with it. Hopefully a lot of that noise isn't necessarily hitting the players, which means that we can at least kind of push on, at least in a footballing sense. And I don't want it to be like a sweep under the rug, sort of situation where we get a couple of wins and everyone stops thinking about it. But like, it's nice to be able to enjoy the football as well, right? Because that's part of why it's been such a problem over time. It was quite funny where he was talking about Stevens, who told him to go on, run into the space and get a goal, which is exactly what he did. And this was after him asking Stevens the instructions as to what to do, because that was his sort of like first set piece in this team. And it makes sense that obviously the way that set pieces work now is very, I wouldn't say convoluted, but everyone has their roles and their jobs and what they're supposed to do. And ultimately, relying on a player's instinct and, fair play from Jack for just telling him to just score, because that's exactly what he did. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Happy weekend, guys. Really, really nice that, we managed to get 3 points on the board. And, we kind of roll on into an FA Cup week where we can always just take a deep breath back and kind of hope that the table starts to go our way a little bit more. And whilst I still personally think that we're not really on for promotion this season, and you can see that with some of the planning that the club has done around the financials of all the transfers that have just taken place and why it was like 2 in on loans and 9 out, it does sort of give me a little bit of hope that maybe we can go back up. Maybe. Would I want to go back up right now? No. Do I feel like maybe they would have more of a plan this time round? Yeah. Does that rely on their finances being not an absolute mess? Also, yeah. Lots and lots of mixed feelings. But I'll tell you what, I'm just happy we got a win, and I'm happy we got to see a really, really decent goal from a debut on where I don't really think most people expected it. And, he seemed quite confident himself, and hopefully now, we've got options between two strikers that have scored quite, within quick succession of each other. That's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Best wishes to Greg, who will be enjoying himself at the time of this recording. Best wishes to all of you wonderful people. Thank you for listening. Thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, all of the bits and pieces. We are a newly independent podcast. So yeah, every sort of follow, like, subscribe and all that kind of stuff helps us out. We really enjoy all of the comments and bits and pieces. They spark episode ideas for us, and we usually cover and like to interact left, right and centre. So yeah, check us out. We are on Facebook, Twitter /X, Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all those wonderful places. We will be back with you tomorrow for something Saints related. Me and Greg will figure out. And until then, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. This is the Daily Saints Pod with Zach and Greg.